Being the mother of a teenager is never an easy task, and it becomes an almost insurmountable challenge when you have to raise them completely on your own. My husband David took his own life on a fateful April morning when our son Sandy was just 4 years old. The memory of that day is burned into my memory, a scar so deep that time has not been able to heal it. It was a sunny, peaceful Sunday. Sandy was playing happily with his father in the backyard while I went out for a moment to the corner store to buy bread and milk for breakfast. I never imagined that in that brief absence my world would completely collapse. When I returned, no more than 20 minutes later, I noticed that an unnatural and heavy stillness enveloped the entire house. It was a dense silence, the kind that warns you that something is not right. I set the groceries down on the counter, and my heart began to beat wildly. I looked out the kitchen window that overlooked the yard. There I saw Sandy, completely motionless, staring upward at something in the old oak tree in the corner of the yard. My blood froze in my veins. Something inside me stirred, and I ran out there with a knot of panic forming in my throat, only to be confronted with the most grotesque and devastating sight of my entire existence. My husband was hanging from a thick rope tied to one of the strongest branches of that tree, and there, just below him, like a small porcelain statue, was our son, staring at his father's lifeless body with a blank expression in his eyes. That was the day that marked the rest of our lives. The trauma of witnessing such a violent and horrific act at such a young age broke Sandy in a way that we were never able to fully repair. From that moment on, my son ceased to be the cheerful, lively child I knew, and became a distant, alien version of himself. His psychiatrist, Dr. Evans, whom we have visited weekly ever since, describes him with clinical and painful accuracy. Sandy seems to have lost the ability to be moved, at least on an emotional level. And it is an undeniable truth. My son no longer fears anything, nor does he feel joy or sadness. Now, having just turned 14, he was a specter in his own home. He didn't talk to anyone, not even me, beyond forced monosyllables. He spent the vast majority of his time locked in his room, a dark sanctuary from which he barely emerged to eat. I lived in a state of constant and mortal concern for him. A few months ago, I had to make the difficult decision to take him out of school and start homeschooling him. He was repeatedly bullied, and his complete passivity in the face of aggression alarmed his teachers and me. It's not that I wanted my son to become a fighter, but the situation had reached an untenable extreme. His teacher called me, her voice trembling, to tell me that 3 older boys had been kicking him mercilessly while he lay on the ground in the playground. But what was most disturbing was what happened next. At one point, Sandy got up with his face covered in blood, but instead of trying to run away or defend himself, he let out a strange, hollow laugh, as if the pain gave him some kind of twisted pleasure. His lips were bleeding profusely, and he licked the blood with eerie calm, muttering that it tasted good. Homeschooling had been a challenge, but recently Sandy had developed a strange new fascination. He had become obsessed with watching mukbang videos. For those unfamiliar with the term, these are videos in which people eat in front of the camera in live streams. This was the only activity besides his dark video games where I saw at least a glimmer of light in his eyes, a fleeting spark of interest in something. Some of my friends, trying to be helpful, suggested that it might be a form of stress relief, a kind of visual catharsis. Clinging to any hope, however small, that my son might find some peace, I agreed to let him watch them for a few days. But then, one night something happened that chilled my soul. It was around 2:15 a.m. when strange noises downstairs woke me up. I crept to Sandy's room, but the bed was empty. I went downstairs with my heart in my mouth and found him sitting at the dining room table, the only light coming from his tablet screen, and he was completely absorbed in watching a video of an Asian woman eating. But when I got closer, I realized that what this woman was eating were live tarantulas. I almost threw up right there.
"Sandy, what are you doing awake at this hour watching that?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He looked up, his eyes reflecting the grotesque image on the screen. "I was thinking of starting my own channel. I want to make videos like these. Will you help me, Mom?" His request, made with chilling seriousness, left me speechless. I didn't know what to say to him. Okay, but now go upstairs and go to bed. We'll talk about this tomorrow, okay? I replied after a brief silence. He looked at me with his usual expressionless face, nodded slowly, and went upstairs, muttering to himself something like, "I'd love to make videos like that. I'd love to eat those things." The next morning I called his psychiatrist and recounted the previous night's incident in detail. To my surprise, Dr. Evans advised me to support him. He argued that it could be an opportunity to strengthen our bond with a shared activity, which could distract his mind and channel his impulses into something, in theory, creative. With many doubts, but desperate to connect with him, I sat down next to him and told him I would help him with his project. We went shopping together, where he bought an excessive amount of processed snacks and junk food. When we got home, he set up a small video camera on the dining room table and began to eat methodically, one snack after another, while the red light on the camera flashed. Soon, this strange routine became part of our lives. Like any good mother, I subscribed to his channel, which he called Sandy Eats, and watched as my son found a new and peculiar identity in the vast world of social media. As a teenager who had already suffered so much, I decided to let him do what he wanted, thinking that for the first time in a long time he was showing initiative for something of his own. His early videos were fairly low-key. He accumulated about 600 or 700 subscribers, and he uploaded a new video every Saturday night. At first I watched them all, but I soon lost interest. It was always the same. Him sitting at the table, eating entire boxes of chocolates, buckets of fried chicken, or whole family-sized pizzas. Sandy was a handsome teenager. He was tall, with brown hair, green eyes, and well-defined features. He had his father's looks, but his mental condition gave him an almost ghostly pallor most of the time, since the sun hardly ever came out because he didn't hang out with anyone. One Tuesday morning, when I woke up and checked my phone, I saw a notification. A new mukbang video that Sandy had uploaded during the night. The title turned my stomach. Delicious Earthworms. I jumped out of bed with my eyes wide open and with trembling hands, played the video. I couldn't believe my eyes. My 14-year-old son was eating live worms in front of the camera with a naturalness that terrified me. He took handfuls of worms wriggling in a pot filled with damp soil and put them in his mouth without hesitation, and without even wrinkling his nose, as if they were something delicious. Some of the creatures tried to escape, hanging from the corners of his mouth, while he chewed them with ruthless ferocity. Half-eaten pieces fell onto the table as he drooled in a grotesque and terrifying way. His face, stained with dirt and fluids, looked horrible as he continued to chew the worms as if they were potato chips. I couldn't hold it in. I had to run to the bathroom to keep from vomiting on my bedroom carpet. Then I hopped over to his room and found him sitting in front of his computer, eagerly reading the comments on his macabre video. "Look, Mom, my video has 20,000 views. I just got 500 new subscribers this morning." His voice had a tone of excitement I hadn't heard in years. "People are finally paying attention to me. I can't believe it, Mom. I finally exist." At that precise moment, I understood with devastating clarity that my son was not okay at all, and that I had been fighting to avoid accepting that terrible truth for far too long. I sat down next to him, and in the softest, most loving voice I could muster said, "But Sandy, honey, this is very disturbing. You're not supposed to eat worms. Let's go see Dr. Evans, please. You're not okay." At that moment, his face transformed. "I'm not going anywhere. Stop telling me I'm sick," he growled at me. He stood up and his voice rising said, "Do you know why I didn't fight back when the bullies kicked me? Because they made me bleed and I liked the taste of my own blood." My heart stopped. His eyes burned with an intensity I had never seen before. "I want to try new things, create my own identity. I'm sick of being the kid who saw his father commit suicide." I nodded, unable to process what I was hearing. Sandy was much worse off than I had thought. "My God, son, stay here. I'm going to call your therapist," I said, trying to maintain my composure. I turned to go to my room to get my phone, but that's when I felt a sharp, heavy blow to the back of my neck. Everything went black after that. I woke up in a state of total confusion, feeling myself being dragged across the floor. I tried to move my arms, but realized my hands and legs were tightly bound with duct tape. "What's going on, Sandy?"
I managed to stammer. "Don't worry, Mom. Just sleep. Everything will be fine," he replied, now eerily calm. I wanted to ask more questions, but a sharp pain in my head caused me to pass out again. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but splashes of cold water on my face brought me back to a confused and disoriented reality. I was tied to a chair in the dining room, and Sandy was standing next to me, staring at me. His eyes, which used to seem empty and almost lifeless, now burned with a terrifying glow, as if he had a very evil intention. Then she smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a psychopathic grimace that sent chills down my spine, and said, "Guess what, Mom? You're my new special edition." Then she looked away toward the camera, which was now pointed directly at us, and said in a cheerful tone, "Hi guys, today I'm going to do a live stream as I promised. I'm going to try some fresh blood today, and guess what? My mom is going to participate." I was paralyzed, my eyes wide and my heart racing. "What the hell is wrong with you, Sandy? What are you doing?" I screamed in terror. "Friends, don't pay attention to her reactions. She's not a person who feels comfortable in front of the camera, so let's get started," she said, ignoring me completely. Suddenly, Sandy walked over to the kitchen sink, took a large butcher knife from the holder, and walked toward me. "Sandy, stop! Untie me right now! This is my last warning! Untie me now!" I yelled, feeling panic take hold of me. "Relax, Mom, I'm not gonna kill you. You'll just be my test kit." I was sweating with fear, watching my own son approach me with a knife in his hand and who knows what intentions. How could I have let things escalate to this point? He kept coming closer, and without hesitation, cut my cheek. I screamed in pain as blood began to drip from the wound, but he didn't care. He leaned over and licked the blood from my face, looking me straight in the eyes in front of the camera. It was chilling. "Delicious," he said, and continued to make small cuts on my arms and neck, licking the blood with terrifying delight. I began to sob uncontrollably as my son, my sick son, continued his insane performance. I screamed for help with all my might, crying at the top of my lungs, when suddenly the front door of our house burst open with a crash. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, rushed in, followed by 2 police officers. Finally, they arrested my son. My neighbor had heard my desperate cries and didn't hesitate to call the police. Now my son is confined to a high-security mental institution. They have to give him a lot of medication as part of his treatment. He barely recognizes me when I go to see him. The last time I went to talk to him, a week ago, he did something horrible. We were sitting in a stark, white visiting room. I was doing my best to remind him of our home, how much I loved him, trying to find a glimmer of my old Sandy, but that's always a losing battle. Suddenly, he interrupted my monologue, looked me in the eyes and asked, "Hey, are you going to eat that?" "Eat what, son?" I asked, confused. Without answering, his hand moved with the speed of a snake and caught a lizard walking on the wall. With a brutal movement, he ripped off its head with his teeth, and as the blood began to drip, he opened his mouth and began to drink it directly from the decapitated body of the animal. I felt a knot in my stomach and my heart squeezed. The nurses came running when they heard the muffled scream I let out and dragged him back to his padded cell. As I continued to shake with fear and horror, my son turned to look at me and laughed at me, then started shouting, "It's delicious, Mom. Try it, it's delicious." It was terribly painful. This weekend I'm going back to see him again, but honestly, my hopes for a recovery are fading more and more. Deep down, I know I've lost my son. Public transportation is a much more disturbing universe than most people dare to imagine. I guess when you're on a crowded bus, commuter train, or subway, you don't feel afraid, right? Sure, that's because routine has numbed you. You're used to traveling every day, always surrounded by an anonymous crowd that gives you a false sense of security. But I wonder, how many of you really stop to observe the people you share that confined space with? You probably avoid that thought because if you looked a little more closely, if you noticed the details, your trips home would become much, much scarier. In this story, I'll tell you about the one time I opened my eyes and looked around carefully, and that curiosity almost cost me my life. My name is Ben, and I'm a streamer. Or rather, I was. I had a considerable following. Some of you may have come across my channel, Urban Spectator, in your recommendations. I wasn't your typical streamer who plays video games or chats banally with their followers. No, my niche was different, more voyeuristic and, let's face it, morally ambiguous. I traveled on public transportation filming people in one of the most strangely private and at the same time public moments they can have. I filmed them exhausted on their way home in the midst of a noisy morning outing with their friends, or even, in my most popular videos, cheating on their partners in the supposed safety of the anonymity of the train car. I filmed everything. Some of you might tell me that what I was doing was wrong, and you know what? You would be absolutely right. I never pretended to be a hero or claimed that my work was ethical, but the harsh reality is that I never said I was a good person. Nor did I need to be, because at the end of the day, every person who criticized me in the comments stayed on my stream to watch my content until the end. Curiosity is an intrinsic part of human nature, and even if you find it hard to admit, someone had to be the villain, someone had to do what I did because people secretly love it. However, at the time, I didn't fully understand the magnitude of my actions. Not because of a moral code that I honestly never had, but because I never understood a fundamental and terrifying truth. You will always find someone more evil than you. And if you play with fire for too long, sooner or later, you will get burned. And boy, did I get burned. Because I met a truly evil person. So evil that they made me feel like a helpless child who'd been playing a cruel joke on a figure who had been in complete control from the beginning. I met the Grim Man, a strange individual who always, without exception, sat in the last seat of the last car of the night subway line. I nicknamed him that because he always wore a huge dark coat, even in summer, with a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses that made it virtually impossible to see his face. I noticed a curious pattern around him. People instinctively moved away from him, as if they had reached a tacit agreement to ignore him, to pretend they didn't see this imposing and frightening man sitting near them. The man never carried a briefcase or a backpack, never seemed to be going to work, and was never in a hurry. For a moment I considered the possibility that he was homeless, but his leather boots were always shiny, impeccably clean, and his coat didn't have a single stain or wrinkle. He was just there, sitting upright, without a cell phone, staring blankly at a fixed point ahead. I'm not going to lie to you, both my audience and I were completely fascinated by him. Ever since I discovered him, I started taking the Nightline every day just to see him. That moment became the highlight of my day and my broadcasts. People subscribed en masse, viewership skyrocketed, and the comments section became a hotbed of theories and speculation. All for filming a strange man in a coat. I was stunned. I couldn't have been happier with my macabre discovery. But on a Tuesday night, everything would change forever. It was a quiet weeknight and the streets were surprisingly empty. I had planned to stay home, but a strange compulsion made me go out. I had to check if the shady man would be there that night too. So I took the subway at exactly 9:45 p.m., when darkness had already taken over the city, and there I found him, sitting in his usual position, unchanging, staring straight ahead. I began filming him as usual with the small spy camera I carried in my shirt pocket, but I must admit that this time I was not as discreet as usual. I was visibly uncomfortable and nervous. The car was almost empty, and there was something about that man that, in the solitude, became increasingly dark and threatening. As soon as the subway doors closed and the train started moving toward the next station, the man stood up. It was the first time I'd seen him stand up. I had never noticed it before, but his body was huge, muscular, and absolutely terrifying. His mere physical presence left me frozen in my seat, paralyzed. Then, with chilling calm, the guy took a syringe out of his coat's inside pocket and, before I could react, jabbed it into my arm. I'll tell you the truth. There was no heroic act on my part. I was so terrified that I was unable to defend myself, scream, call the police, anything. I just stood there, helpless and without the slightest intention of fighting for my life, like an animal hypnotized by its predator. As soon as the unknown liquid entered my bloodstream, everything began to feel strange and distorted. My vision began to blur, as if I were looking through a fogged-up window, and my whole body became paralyzed. I tried to move a finger, but I couldn't. It was as if my brain had been disconnected from my body. Somehow I was awake and asleep at the same time, imprisoned in my own mind by the substance that psychopath had injected me with. As I struggled futilely to move, I watched as the train car distorted around me, transforming into a nightmarish version of itself. The walls seemed to breathe, and the colors became nauseating. The man in the coat had also changed. He was no longer wearing a coat. His body was exposed in a horrifying sight, like a tall, faceless albino demon. He approached me with complete indifference, placing his smooth, pale face inches from mine. And then, without warning, he began to melt like hot wax. For the first time, I saw a mouth open on that featureless face, a black, jagged crack. I saw him scream in front of me, a silent scream, but so violent and terrifying that I felt my heart was going to stop in my chest. At this chilling image, a rush of adrenaline coursed through my paralyzed body, and I tried to fight to wake up with all my strength. I knew in some corner of my mind that if I tried hard enough, I could break the spell, so I desperately concentrated all my willpower on moving my fingers little by little, trying to wake up with all my strength. After what seemed like an eternity, I screamed with all my might and somehow woke up. Once I was conscious, I was shocked. I thought only a few seconds had passed, but when I looked at my watch, I saw that I had been unconscious for almost an hour and a half. The shadowy man was no longer in front of me, and the train, now empty, had arrived at the terminal station. Shaking, I moved to another car where there were only a few people and curled up in a corner, terrified, waiting for the long journey back to the station where I had boarded. It was when I checked my stream that I understood everything that had really happened. The comment section was flooded with messages in capital letters. People were shocked and scared for me when they saw the video of what happened while I was unconscious. Rewinding the recording, I confirmed what all the comments were telling me. After injecting me, the scary man started to lift me out of my seat to take me with him. But at that moment, he noticed the small flashing light from the camera in my pocket. He immediately saw my phone and could see himself on the live stream with hundreds of people commenting in real time on what they were witnessing. Exposed, he simply dropped me back into my seat, turned around, and calmly walked away, disappearing at the next station. I couldn't believe it. My own stream, that exploitative tool I used to profit from exposing unsuspecting people without their consent, had saved my life. That was the last time I ever made that kind of content. I never recorded anyone in public again. From that day on, I limited myself to making harmless opinion videos for YouTube. I still think about that night, how my mind made me dream of a faceless demon when the real monster, a man of flesh and blood, was trying to kidnap me. I often wonder where he would have taken me if I hadn't seen the camera. And although my imagination is creative, I always come to the same conclusion. Anything I can imagine would have fallen short of what that man would have actually done to me. My name is Clara Bellwether, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been a series of difficulties and setbacks. I am an orphan, and as a child I bounced from one foster home to another, just another piece in a system that never had a real place for me, until I turned 18. At that point, the system patted me on the back, abandoned me to my fate, and left me on the street. Living on the street was a brutal and constant lesson in survival. I had to fight daily for the most basic necessities, such as a bite to eat or a dry place to spend the night. But through all that misery, I had a reason to wake up and try again every day, and that reason was Samuel Jones. Samuel was literally my oldest friend and the only pillar in my life. I met him during my first and most terrifying days living on the streets, and from the very beginning he began to take care of me as if I were his little sister. He always took me to the soup kitchens that served the best soups when hunger struck and I needed a hot meal. He brought me coats and sweaters when he received clothing donations from a church, and he constantly watched over me, especially at night, as the streets were not a safe place for a homeless woman. At first, my survival instinct made me skeptical of him. I wondered why a stranger would be so incredibly kind to me without ever asking for anything in return. But every time I looked into his tired but kind eyes, I realized that this man was simply a good person in a world that often wasn't.
But everything changed one Thursday afternoon, under a gray and leaden sky. Samuel and I were standing in line at a soup kitchen when a very neat and strange-looking man approached us. The guy told us his name was Mr. Alistair Finch, and that he had a business proposal for us. "I see you're homeless, so I assume you have little or no money for food and basic necessities," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What if I told you that I could offer you a job where all you had to do was eat?" I was completely perplexed by his offer. It sounded extremely shady, and I knew from bitter experience that no one in this world paid people to eat free food. I told myself there had to be a catch, some fine print we weren't seeing. The man noticed this, and as if to illustrate his point, he showed us a video on his tablet. It was a video of people eating, but not just any people. On the screen, I saw extremely frail and emaciated-looking people gobbling down enormous amounts of food, shoving it down their throats at an inhuman speed. Seeing this, I knew there was something very strange about it all. The people in the video ate with animalistic desperation, so fast that they practically inhaled the food without chewing. In addition, they all wore very loose and large clothing, and I couldn't understand why people who ate so much food looked so weak and malnourished. Although it was incredibly strange, the offer was tempting. Getting paid to eat free food was infinitely better than the daily uncertainty Samuel and I faced. But before I could utter a word, my friend Samuel stepped forward and said, "I'll do it, but on one condition. I would like half of my payment and any leftover food from the videos to be given to my friend Clara." I started to protest, telling him it wasn't necessary, but he pulled me aside for a moment and said quietly, "Look, Clara, we don't know who this guy is. And as I've always told you, the first rule of the street is to trust no one. But we'd be fools to turn down this offer without even trying it. Let me do it first. If I try it and see something shady, I promise I'll leave and come back to you. But I really don't want you to do it because we don't know what the job will be like, and my priority is to keep you safe." I looked at him and saw the sincere concern in his eyes, so with a heavy heart, I agreed to let him go. Then we went back to the strange man, and Samuel accepted his offer. 3 weeks after that day, I began to worry seriously. I hadn't seen or heard from my friend Samuel since he started working for Mr. Finch, and my only contact was with Mr. Finch himself, who showed up at the end of each week at the shelter where I was staying, bringing coolers full of food and an envelope with some money that he said Samuel had sent me. Whenever I asked him questions like, "How is Samuel? Can I see him? When is he coming back?" Mr. Finch always responded with a vague and evasive, "Soon." Weeks turned into months, and I finally reached a point where I couldn't take it anymore. I knew in my heart that Samuel would never abandon me like that he would never leave me alone. Even if he was sending money and food, I knew he would want to see me and make sure I was okay. I had a strong hunch that something was terribly wrong with Samuel, and I had to find out. So, with some of the money I had been receiving, I bought a very cheap secondhand cell phone and searched the internet for mukbang videos on Mr. Finch's channel. I checked the most recent videos, and sure enough, there was Samuel, starring in most of them. But his appearance horrified me. He looked extremely frail, with sunken eyes and a dead stare, as he devoured huge amounts of food with a voracity that was unnatural for him. He looked even thinner than before, and I noticed that he, like the rest of the people in the videos, was eating as if his life depended on it. I found it incredibly strange because even in our worst days of hunger on the streets, he never ate that way, so desperately. This left me with a knot in my stomach and a feeling that something terrible was going on. I waited until the end of the week when Mr. Finch made his usual visit to drop off the thing Samuel had supposedly sent me, and as soon as he left, I made a decision. I would follow him, hoping to discover where Samuel was being held. I followed Mr. Finch at a safe distance to an old, decrepit warehouse in an abandoned industrial area and watched him suspiciously as he looked around before slipping through a side door. I waited a few minutes, my heart pounding in my throat, before managing to pick the lock on the back door and enter the warehouse, using one of the many unorthodox skills I had learned living on the streets. As I moved stealthily through the dusty interior, I passed a room that looked familiar. I soon realized it was the recording set, the room where Mr. Finch's videos were filmed. Finally,
I came to a metal door from which I heard several muffled noises and moans. This door was slightly ajar, and as I approached, I could hear someone screaming in anger. This made me freeze for a moment, but then I moved forward and pressed my eye to the crack to see what was going on. But what I saw there made my blood run cold and gave me goosebumps. There were dozens of people, packed like sardines in a can in a dirty, foul-smelling room. Their hands and feet were bound, and the smell of misery and despair emanating from the room was unbearable. They were all gagged and looked more dead than alive. Obvious starvation made their bones incredibly visible through their skin, which looked like tracing paper. As I watched the horrific scene, I saw Mr. Finch in the center of the room, handing out large, baggy clothes to some of the malnourished people and ordering them to put them on. One man, who looked extremely weak, began to stagger, too frail to stand, and fell to the floor, powerless. At that moment, I watched in horror as Mr. Finch hit him hard with the back of his hand. The man began to bleed from his nose after the blow, and then Mr. Finch looked at him with utter disgust and said, "Your hunger does not give you the right to mess things up. We have a video to shoot, and I don't want any mistakes. We're running late, and I need to post more videos to make more money. Remember, any problems will result in 6 more days of fasting. So eat as much as you can because you never know when your next meal will be." I covered my mouth with both hands so as not to make a sound, but I was completely horrified. I watched as one of the malnourished people rushed to help the man lying bleeding on the floor. He confronted Mr. Finch and said, "You can't do this to people." Mr. Finch's response was a quick and brutal punch to the mouth. He took out a metal cane and began beating him mercilessly with a sick, psychopathic smile on his face. "Telling me what I can and can't do, huh? Maybe 8 more days of starvation will teach you a lesson. After that, you'll realize that you stopped being a person the moment I took you off the streets. You're nothing more than a showpiece for my videos, and the sooner you realize that, the better for you." I froze when my eyes finally recognized the person being beaten like an animal. It was my dear friend Samuel. Seeing him in that state caused me to have a mini mental breakdown. My mind couldn't process such horror. A scream escaped my lips before I could stop it, a muffled sound full of panic. Mr. Finch turned his eyes in my direction, and that's when I realized I was in trouble. So without wasting any time, I ran with all my might to get help. I could hear people chasing me, but I managed to get out of the warehouse just before they caught me, and once outside, I ran for my life to the nearest police station, screaming and crying. But guess what? When I finally arrived, they turned me away. They all assumed I was just a crazy homeless woman talking nonsense. I can't describe how terribly defensive and indignant I felt. I knew I had to do something because no one else seemed to care. Then it all clicked into place. I realized that Mr. Finch was recruiting homeless people with the promise of a good job, and once they accepted, he would tie them up and lock them in that warehouse. He would starve them for weeks so that when he finally gave them food in front of a camera, they would eat as much as possible, desperate from having been deprived of it for so long. I also understood why he targeted homeless people. He knew perfectly well that no one would care if any of us disappeared. So that's why I decided to share my story with the world, in the hope that someone, somewhere will do something to help me get justice for Samuel, and for all the other people who, to this day, remain in Mr. Finch's captivity. Internet trends are everywhere these days. They flood all social media, and they are basically the engine that drives much of the internet. And while these trends, challenges, and dares seem fun and harmless, one of these trends ruined my life forever. My name is Jake Phillips, and this is my story. I used to be a YouTuber, and although I wasn't one of the big names, I had a pretty decent and loyal following. My channel, The Phillips Bros, consisted of me and my little brother Sam, doing pranks, challenges, and basically everything normal YouTubers do to entertain people. It happened on July 26th. My little brother Sam and I decided to do the 24-hour challenge working for the delivery company DoorDash, a trend that had become popular on YouTube at the time. We were really excited about it, and from the number of people commenting on our posts, we could tell our viewers were too. We started at 7 a.m. sharp, which was when we started our live stream on YouTube. At first, we weren't getting many orders, but as soon as 10 a.m. rolled around, the phone started ringing nonstop. We didn't have a cameraman, so we took turns holding the camera, which was my phone, to keep things interesting and dynamic. We did silly things between deliveries, like trying to do a backflip in a park or prank calling our friends, all while continuing to deliver every order on time. Around 4 p.m. we reached our peak audience. We had about 400 viewers watching our live stream. I remember we were incredibly happy with that number, as it was one of the highest numbers we had achieved on the channel since we started, so that encouraged us to continue with the broadcast. As the hours passed, we continued to make numerous deliveries, and before we knew it, the sun began to set and night fell on the city. The flow of requests began to slow down, and our viewers were also gradually decreasing. In addition, we were exhausted. We had been out and about since early in the morning, but I was determined to keep the few remaining viewers entertained, so we started doing more extreme and fun things between requests, such as shouting ridiculous things at strangers from the car. But the more interesting content we tried to create, the more tired we felt. And by the time it was late at night, our viewers had dwindled to only about 25 people. So we decided to take a break for a while and recharge our batteries. We pulled into a small roadside restaurant we found by chance, and I had no idea where we were at that point. We had driven so much throughout the day that we had ended up in a completely unfamiliar part of town. Still, we kept the live stream going for the 25 people who were still with us, even though we weren't doing anything particularly funny. I started to feel sleepy, and I knew my little brother was feeling it too. So I asked him, "Want some coffee, Sam?" My brother replied with a yawn, "You know I don't like that stuff, Jake." With all the hustle and bustle of the day, I'd completely forgotten that my brother doesn't like coffee. "Oh, right, I forgot, but we have to stay awake. Do you need something to drink?" He replied, "I don't know. Better get me an energy drink or something." We called the waitress and ordered some food, a coffee for me, and an energy drink for him, and while she went to get our order, I checked our live stream. The number of viewers had dropped to 15. It was almost 11:30 p.m., so I assumed that most of the remaining viewers had gone to sleep. We weren't getting any new orders either, because hardly anyone orders food that late. When the waitress brought our food, the first thing I noticed was the strange energy drink they brought for my brother. It was called Volt, and that was the only English word written on the can. Everything else, such as the list of ingredients and nutritional information, was written in a foreign language that I couldn't recognize. I remember asking the waitress what kind of energy drink it was. I'd never heard of that brand before. She said it was a brand imported from Eastern Europe, and that it was the only one they had left. My brother apparently didn't care where it came from. He opened the can and started drinking. I remember him saying, "It's okay, Jake. All these energy drinks are the same in the end." I thanked the waitress for the food, and as soon as he finished drinking, my brother Sam started acting very strangely. His eyes were bloodshot, and he started banging on the table while shouting, "Let's do this!" I was surprised by his burst of energy. "Are you okay, Sam?" I asked. My brother replied, "I'm great, bro. You worry too much." I was about to say something else when the strangest thing happened. We had received an order. This seemed really odd to me since it was 1:45 a.m. The customer's message said, "I'm really hungry, and you're the only people still active in this area. I just want some burgers and a Coke." My gut told me not to do it, but Sam, who was still incredibly hyper, insisted, "Come on, we have to do it too." So I ignored my bad feeling and accepted the order. We were already at a restaurant, so we just ordered the food there. As I said before, I had no idea where we were, so I turned on my phone's location and used Google Maps to guide me. After driving for about 20 minutes, we finally arrived at the indicated neighborhood. Everything was incredibly quiet and dark. There were hardly any lights on apart from the street lights, and all the houses looked identical, so I didn't know which one to go to. I tried calling and texting the person who had ordered the food, but I didn't get any response. I told Sam what was going on. He, who was still hyperactive, got out of the car and pointed to a house at the end of the street. "What's up with that house?" he said. Although I couldn't see it well in the dark, I could make out that the house he was pointing at looked pretty abandoned and run down. I knew no one in their right mind would live there. "No, Sam. That house looks old and abandoned. I'm sure no one lives there," I said. I wasn't prepared for what happened next, and I'm pretty sure the reason my brother did what he did was because of the strange energy drink he had consumed earlier. Sam looked at me slowly, with an almost maniacal smile, and said, "Well, we'll never know unless we find out, right?" Then he yelled at the top of his lungs, "DoorDash!" and ran straight toward the abandoned house. To be honest, at that point I had completely forgotten that the YouTube stream was still live as I ran after him with my phone in hand. He was incredibly fast, and I couldn't catch up to him before he reached the house. The wooden exterior of the house was rotten, and the place smelled of dampness and decay, but none of that seemed to bother my brother, who began ringing the doorbell insistently, which surprisingly still worked. I remember yelling at him, "Let's get out of here, Sam, there's no one here." But he completely ignored me and kept ringing the doorbell non-stop. I had had enough of his antics and was about to drag him back to the car when suddenly something terrifying happened. A huge man broke down the wooden door of the house from the inside, sending it flying into 1,000 pieces. Instantly, I was hit by multiple pieces of wood from the broken door, which dug into my face and arms. It felt like 1,000 splinters piercing my skin at once, and the force of the impact knocked me backwards. I looked up and saw a gigantic, disheveled man holding a metal bar. Sam, my little brother, had taken the full force of the initial impact because he was standing right in front of the door. He tried to run, but the man hit him in the leg with the bar, and I heard the sickening crunch of my brother's bone breaking. Sam started screaming in pain, and the man proceeded to do something that scarred me for life. He began repeatedly breaking my brother's other leg, hitting him over and over with the metal bar. I can still hear each of those cracks in my nightmares. It didn't take long before my brother started screaming my name, "Jake, Jake, help me." But I did nothing, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. I was completely paralyzed with fear as I watched that monster break my little brother's bones into pieces. Sam's screams continued to grow louder, and I could tell they were irritating his attacker. The man let out what sounded like an animalistic growl and began hitting Sam in the head with the bar. It didn't take long for Sam to stop moving, and I could see how his head had been deformed by the blows. After a while, the man stopped attacking, but Sam's body lay on the ground, bloody and disfigured. Now the monster looked at me and began to approach me. I didn't run or do anything. At that moment, I just wanted to die. I had let my brother be murdered, and I knew that if I survived, I could never look my parents in the face again. I was supposed to protect him, and I had failed him in the worst possible way. So I told myself it would be better if we both died there. By then, the man was on top of me. He punched me in the face with the end of the bar, and I felt my nose break, and he was about to hit me again when 2 shots rang out, and I saw the man fall heavily to the ground. Before I could understand what had happened, I was surrounded by police officers. The last thing I remember from that night was seeing the paramedics carrying my brother's lifeless body away on a stretcher as I passed out. I woke up in a hospital bed and saw my parents standing next to me. Their eyes were teary, and I soon began to cry inconsolably as they both hugged me. Later, the police came in and asked me for a statement, so I told them everything that had happened. I asked them how they had found me, and they told me that they had received a call from one of the 3 remaining viewers of the live stream, who had witnessed the entire horror live, as the YouTube stream had remained active throughout the attack. They then told me that because my location was enabled on my phone, all they had to do was track the signal and find me. I had no idea that people were still watching the stream, but whoever you were, thank you for saving my life. Although the man who killed Sam was dead, my parents asked about his identity. The police said they didn't know who he was. When they checked his fingerprints in the database, the man had no criminal record and no registered identity in the United States. Although Sam's attacker was, in a sense, brought to justice, the loss of my brother hurts me in ways I can't even imagine. I can't help but feel that it was all my fault, and I know I will continue to feel this weight for the rest of my life. It's been 2 years since this incident, and it still feels like it happened yesterday. Since then, I have left YouTube and deleted my channel entirely to try to cope with the trauma. Most days when I go online, I still see people doing these trends or challenges on social media. And my message to all of you is to be very careful out there. Because you never know when something that seems as nice and fun as these trends could ruin your life the way it ruined mine.